Sarah Irving had always carried the label of the strong one within her family, although in reality that word was an elegant disguise for neglect. In her early 30s, she worked as an accountant at a firm in Palo Alto, surrounded by spreadsheets, calculations, and clients who demanded more than they paid. Her life was stable but austere. A small rental apartment, a coffee maker that sometimes dripped more than it should, and a routine of bus, office, and silent return. Meanwhile, her younger sister Melissa seemed to live in a gilded showcase: trips to New York, parties in San Diego, a late-model MacBook that her father had bought her with the same carelessness with which others buy supermarket flowers. On each significant date, the difference became a direct blow. Sarah's birthday went unnoticed, reduced to a brief call or, worse, a terse message. Instead, her mother's social media feeds were filled with photos with Melissa under saccharine captions like, "Blessed with the best," "Daughter in the world." The contrast was brutal, but Sarah had learned to keep quiet, to transform her rage into a knot in her stomach that grew ever tighter. The only voice that rescued her from that shadow was that of her grandmother Eleanor, a silver-haired woman with a steely temper, who repeated phrases that became etched like invisible tattoos. "It's not that they love Melissa more, it's that they love the idea of themselves more. You are the mirror they don't want to look at." Sarah vividly remembered the day she tried to join the school debate club. The fee was just $200, and she had practiced for weeks in front of the mirror trying to convince her parents. Robert, her father, didn't even look her in the eye when he told her they couldn't afford to spend money on indulgent things. Barely 3 days later, she saw him arrive home with a large, shiny box, a new $3,000 MacBook for Melissa. It was at that moment that she realized her efforts would never be as valuable as her sister's whimsical smile. And although she tried to swallow her humiliation, Eleanor was the only one who sat by her side that night, stroking her hair and reminding her that her voice was worth more than any computer. Life seemed marked by that duality: indifference and contempt at home, silent refuge in Grandma's arms. Eleanor greeted her every weekend with freshly baked lemon cookies and a worn armchair that held all the confessions Sarah couldn't utter anywhere else. It was as if that house in Palo Alto were the only neutral territory on an emotional battlefield. There, Sarah could shed tears, laugh without feeling observed, and above all, listen to stories her grandmother told with the calm of someone who had seen too many storms. Eleanor wasn't just a grandmother. She was a compass, a retaining wall, the voice that reminded her that one day everything would make sense. At university, Sarah worked part-time at the library to pay for her books, while Melissa received a new car as a motivational gift for barely passing grades. This difference became routine, as if the parents had decided to invest all their resources in one daughter's shiny exterior and leave the other to build herself through sacrifice. Sarah didn't complain out loud, but inside she kept an invisible inventory of every moment her efforts were ignored. This emotional accounting weighed more than any financial balance sheet, and only Eleanor's proud smile managed to balance the scales. Time passed, and just as Sarah had learned to survive without expecting anything from her parents, the news came that tore her life in two: Eleanor's death. She received the call on a dull Tuesday while reviewing a report at the office. The broken voice of a neighbor informed her that her grandmother had died in her sleep. Sarah felt the air rush out of her body, as if someone had slammed all the windows shut. She ran to Eleanor's house, and there, amid the teacups, still on the shelf and the lingering scent of lavender, she realized she had lost the only person who had ever made her feel essential. The funeral was a cruel portrait of what Sarah had always suspected. While she choked back tears, her parents seemed more concerned with greeting neighbors and maintaining the image of a close-knit family. Melissa, wearing dark glasses that looked more like a fashion accessory than a sign of mourning, became the center of attention, receiving hugs and words of comfort as if the loss belonged only to her. Sarah watched in silence, feeling that even at Eleanor's farewell, invisibility had once again taken over. However, beneath all that social media, one detail would change everything. The family lawyer asked to speak with her privately. Days later, at the reading of the will, the notary's words were like an electric shock in the middle of the courtroom. Eleanor's house, located in Palo Alto and valued at $750,000, was now exclusively Sarah's. There was a silence that seemed like a bottomless pit, broken only by a muffled murmur from her mother and an incredulous gasp from Melissa. For Sarah, it wasn't just a material inheritance. It was a refuge, a symbol, confirmation that Eleanor had seen what no one else had wanted to acknowledge. For her parents and sister, however, it represented status, money, and control. From that day on, Sarah knew that the real battle had only just begun. It didn't take long for the Isabo first pressures to arrive disguised as affection. One afternoon, Sarah received a call from her mother, Linda, in a sweet tone that barely concealed her intentions. "Daughter, that house is a big responsibility for you. Perhaps it would be best to sell it and split the money so no one else has to bear such a heavy burden." Before she could answer, she heard Melissa's voice in the background, feigning sobs, saying that the house could be the beginning of her new life, her dream project. When she hung up, Sarah felt her still fresh grief mix with anger. They hadn't even waited for the funeral flowers to wither before turning Eleanor's memory into currency. The calls didn't stop. Uncles, cousins, and even old family acquaintances appeared like a synchronized chorus, all repeating the same melody. "Think of the good of the family, Sarah." The final blow came in the form of a text message from her father, Robert. "Either you sell and distribute, or you're out of the family." Sarah read those words several times, incredulous. It was confirmation of what Eleanor had told her so many times, that the family loved the idea of itself more than the people inside. Instead of crumbling, something inside her began to take shape, a kind of cold determination she'd never felt before. That's when an unexpected message appeared in Sarah's inbox. Marcus Chen, a former college classmate who now ran a thriving tech company, wrote reminiscing and, almost casually, asking if Eleanor's house was available. He'd heard rumors and was interested in buying it. Sarah read and reread those lines, feeling a mixture of irony and poetic justice. The CEO of the company where Melissa worked wanted the very property her family was trying to steal from her. The universe was offering her a letter that was hard to ignore. For days, Sarah silently pondered the idea, weighing every risk and consequence. She met with Marcus at a discreet downtown cafe, and the negotiation took shape. They reached a surprising agreement: $800,000, a 10-year lease with a protected lease, and the right to repurchase for the same amount. Marcus wasn't just buying a house, he was also giving Sarah a legal shield against any maneuvering by her family. 3 days before the big meeting with her parents and Melissa, they signed the contract. Sarah filed the copy in a blue folder with the calmness of someone preparing an ace up her sleeve for just the right moment. The day of the meeting arrived with a charged, her parents showed up accompanied by a real estate agent, and with documents already prepared, as if they assumed Sarah would sign without resistance. Melissa entered behind them, impeccably made up, and wearing a superior smile that would soon crumble. In the lawyer's room, Robert began speaking in an authoritarian tone, listing reasons why selling was the fairest thing for everyone. Sarah listened silently, letting each word sink like stones in a pond, until she looked up and calmly said, "If you want this house so badly, let's go see it right now." No one suspected a thing. They believed she had finally given up, that the invisible daughter had once again fit the script of obedience they themselves had written. Upon arriving at the house, footsteps echoed on the wooden porch until the door opened, and Marcus Chen appeared, elegant and serene, keys in hand. "Welcome, I'm the new owner," he announced to the family, the curious neighbors who had approached, and even the lawyer herself. The scene froze in an awkward silence that was soon broken by Melissa's distraught face, as she realized that the seat of her supposed professional future now belonged to someone who would never protect her. The impact was immediate. The neighbors who had lived with Eleanor for years began to murmur among themselves, some even nodding as if this revelation confirmed something they already suspected. The lawyer laid out the documents on the dining room table, demonstrating that everything was in order and that Eleanor's will had been protected with almost prophetic foresight. Robert, red-faced with rage, accused his daughter of fraud, but Marcus responded with surgical composure, showing receipts, transfers, and the validity of each clause. The evidence was irrefutable, and in that instant Sarah understood that she wasn't just defending a house, she was dismantling the narrative of a lifetime of injustice. Linda, unable to contain herself, burst out with a scream that echoed off the walls. "You chose strangers over your family." Sarah looked at her without flinching and responded with a firmness that surprised even Linda. "I didn't choose strangers. I chose me." That moment became the true breaking point. The mask of family unity collapsed in front of witnesses, exposing the rawness of years of manipulation. Melissa, through tears and rage, tried to convince Marcus to reverse the sale, but he simply reminded her that the corporate world is not governed by sentimentality, but by contracts. The silence that followed was the loudest surrender Sarah had ever heard. With the house now in Marcus's hands, the dynamic changed completely. The CEO decided to move his marketing team downstairs, transforming the rooms that had once smelled of Eleanor's lemon cookies into offices with whiteboards and screens. Sarah, meanwhile, remained living upstairs, with an ironclad contract that guaranteed her security and stability. The irony was evident. Every morning, Melissa had to walk through the same door that represented her defeat, pass by employees who knew the whole story, and bear the weight of a public failure that couldn't be masked with Instagram filters. Sarah, far from feeling compassion, responded with the coldness of someone who learned too early that indulgence only fuels abusers. When Melissa tried to approach, seeking dialogue with rehearsed victim lines, she answered with cutting calm, "It's not torture, it's consequence." Those words hung in the air like a definitive sentence. And here I take this opportunity to address you who are reading this story. If you've reached this point, tell me in the comments where you're following us from. Every family story has its own echo, and I'm interested in knowing where in the world it resonates with you. Melissa's downfall was as swift as it was predictable. Without the constant support of her parents and facing the real pressure of a competitive work environment, her lack of preparation was soon exposed. Reports came back incomplete, presentations were superficial, and her colleagues began to whisper that she was there only because of her last name and not because of her merit. Marcus, a pragmatist to a fault, quickly placed her on a performance plan. Sarah observed everything from just the right distance, neither celebrating her misfortune nor intervening to rescue her. She simply let the truth speak for itself, something she had been denied throughout her life. Finally, the news echoed throughout the office. Melissa had been fired. The reaction wasn't one of introspection, but of fury. She directly blamed Sarah, claiming that her maneuver with the house had ruined her career. But those who had worked with her knew the truth. Melissa hadn't failed because of the sale, but because of her inability to deliver results. For Sarah, hearing those words was like a mirror flipped. All her life she'd been told she was the strong one, to justify quitting, and now her sister was trying to blame her to justify her failure. The difference was that, for the first time, Sarah wasn't burdened with that burden. The parents were quick to react to Melissa's dismissal. Instead of facing the truth, they took to social media, posting dramatic messages on Facebook that spoke of a betrayed daughter and a family torn apart by ambition. Some distant relatives echoed these posts, joining the chorus of victimhood. Others, however, opted for silence, as if they finally understood there was something deeper going on that wasn't being said in public. What surprised Sarah was the neighbors' reaction. Far from condemning her, many congratulated her privately, reminding her how much Eleanor had done for her and repeating a phrase that became a soothing balm. "Your grandmother would be proud." The tension grew so much that Linda and Robert, unable to bear the uncomfortable stares in the neighborhood, decided to sell their own house and move to Arizona. The escape was almost clandestine, as if they thought the distance would erase the accumulated shame. For Sarah, that departure didn't bring immediate relief, but rather a bitter confirmation. Her parents preferred to escape rather than acknowledge their mistakes. Still, amid the loneliness left by the noise, she began to experience a different, less oppressive silence. For the first time in her adult life, the space she inhabited wasn't marked by manipulation, but by the possibility of building herself from scratch. One afternoon, while organizing the house's library, Sarah found a wooden box hidden in Eleanor's bedroom closet. Inside were carefully folded letters addressed to her. They were messages written over the years, predictions and advice that revealed how much her grandmother had anticipated what was to come. "I know they will try to take away what is yours," one of them read. "But remember that the true inheritance is not the house, but the value you have built for yourself." Reading those lines, Sarah felt a lump in her throat and tears that she hadn't let out since the funeral. Eleanor's voice continued to accompany her even after her departure. With each letter, Sarah discovered that nothing had been a coincidence. Eleanor had planned every detail to protect her, knowing the family would use manipulation as a weapon. Among her papers, she also found stashed receipts, legal documents, and personal notes that reinforced the idea that her grandmother had left her not only property, but a shield against injustice. That evening, over a steaming cup of coffee in the garden, Sarah allowed herself a wholehearted smile for the first time in years. She understood that true victory lay not in humiliating others, but in having achieved a space of her own where no one could erase her voice or her efforts. The following days settled into a new, strangely peaceful routine. Sarah would wake up early, make her coffee in the kitchen, which still retained the scent of Eleanor's lavender, and then head downstairs to listen to the murmur of the marketing team downstairs. It was a curious blend of past and present. The family home transformed into a workspace, and she, from above, managing her life with a stability she'd never felt before. The simple fact of not paying rent gave her immense financial respite, and every corner of the house became a reminder that years of sacrifice had finally found a tangible purpose. Despite the calm, echoes of the past still lingered, trying to unsettle her. Sporadic messages from Melissa arrived on her phone with phrases like, "You can still fix this," or, "We're sisters. You shouldn't be so cruel." Sarah read, took a deep breath, and filed away without responding. She no longer felt guilt, only distance. And if you, who are still reading up to this point, understand what it means to break free from invisible chains, please support it with a like and share this story. Sometimes sharing isn't just about spreading the word. It's also a way to let someone else know they're not alone in their family struggles. As the months passed, Melissa's image faded. Without a steady job and without the financial support of her parents, her life lost the bright facade she had displayed for years. Some acquaintances from university commented that they had seen her working in temporary positions, always with an angry expression, as if the entire world owed her something. Sarah, on the other hand, was beginning to recover. Pieces of herself she'd never had time to acknowledge. She resumed her love of nighttime reading, went for runs around the neighborhood without feeling judgmental stares, and even began saving with the idea of investing in a master's degree she had put off for years. The house was also slowly transforming into a reflection of her new present. She painted the living room walls in a warm tone, hung photographs she'd kept in boxes, and bought simple but carefully chosen furniture. Each change was like a silent declaration. This space, finally, was hers. It was no longer the house where she'd only taken refuge to cry in Eleanor's arms. It was now the place from which she could project a future. Every morning when she opened the windows and felt the light enter, Sarah repeated to herself that there was no greater justice than living in peace without owing anything to anyone. A year later, the story had spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond. Some told it as an anecdote of poetic justice, others as an example that silence can also become a powerful weapon. Sarah, without intending to, had become a symbol of resilience for several acquaintances who were going through similar situations with their families. People who had barely acknowledged her before now sought her out for advice, or simply to hear her say that it was possible to break out of the role of invisible daughter. This surprised her, because she had never sought to be the protagonist of anything. She only wanted to protect what her grandmother had entrusted to her. What didn't change was her steadfastness in the face of her parents' attempts at reconnection. Robert and Linda, from Arizona, sent ambiguous messages that oscillated between reproaches and pleas, as if hoping time would erase what had happened. Sarah no longer felt compelled to respond. She had understood that true love isn't measured in public gestures or forced sacrifices, but in the constancy of someone who is by your side, unconditionally as Eleanor had been. For the first time, Sarah felt that her life wasn't defined by her parents' absence, but by the presence of her own decisions. One autumn afternoon, Marcus invited her to a meeting downstairs with his team. They wanted to thank her for allowing the house to become a productive and, in a way, symbolic space. Sarah accepted, although she hesitated at first. She wasn't used to taking center stage in anything. When she walked downstairs and saw everyone standing, applauding softly, she felt a strange warmth flow through her chest. Marcus spoke up and said that the house wasn't just an office, but a reminder of resilience, of how even in the harshest environments something new can flourish. Sarah unwittingly became a living example of what it meant to endure with dignity. That night, after the meeting, she went back up to her room with a mixture of vertigo and calm. She sat at the desk where she kept Eleanor's letters and wrote a short note in a notebook. Today I understood that the best revenge isn't emotional, it's contractual. Rereading the sentence, she couldn't help but smile wryly. It had taken her years to understand that she didn't need to shout to be heard or beg to be acknowledged. All she had to do was be prepared, trust that her courage didn't depend on anyone else. In that moment, she knew that, although the path hadn't been easy, she had finally found the closure she so desperately needed. At dawn, the next day, Sarah went out into the garden with a hot cup of coffee. The fresh air reminded her of the mornings Eleanor had woken her with the scent of freshly baked cookies. She looked around and felt that, for the first time, the house was no longer a battlefield, but a refuge that pulsed with its own rhythm. There were no shouts, no reproaches, no blackmail, only the bird song and the distant murmur of the employees starting their day downstairs. This contrast between the serenity of the present and the noise of the past was definitive proof that she had won the war, without having to raise her voice. Over time, Sarah learned not to look back with resentment, but with the certainty that each wound had shaped her to endure. The figure of Melissa, her parents, and their manipulations faded like a shadow that loses strength in the light of day. In its place remained the memory of Eleanor, not as a sad memory, but as a compass that had led her there. As she finished her coffee, Sarah realized that the most valuable thing wasn't the material inheritance, but the certainty of having chosen herself. And with a calm she had never felt before, she allowed herself to close the chapter by repeating softly, "The best revenge isn't emotional, it's contractual."